It was a warm morning, and Officer Mark Henderson had just started his shift. The streets of the city were alive with the usual rhythm. Cars honking, shopkeepers setting up for the day, and people rushing to work. Mark had been a police officer for almost 10 years, and he had seen just about everything. Fights in parking lots, heated arguments in grocery stores, even people arguing over who had the right to a bench in the park. But every shift was unpredictable, and he knew that even a quiet morning could turn into chaos within minutes. Mark was driving slowly down Main Street when his radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm but firm, telling him about a disturbance on the corner of Oak Avenue and 7th Street. "Two individuals in a heated argument," the voice said. "One is a woman, one is a man. Crowd gathering. Units in the area respond." Mark sighed, flipped on his siren, and made a U-turn. A crowd gathering could mean trouble, and trouble could escalate fast if not handled quickly. When he arrived at the intersection, the first thing he noticed was the noise. Dozens of voices mixed together, some shouting, some laughing, others just whispering to each other about what was going on. In the middle of it all, a woman stood facing a man who was already turning away. The woman's voice was sharp, like she was trying to get him to stop. The man didn't look back, just kept walking toward the next block. Mark couldn't hear their words clearly, but he could tell there was tension. His instincts told him that the man wanted to get away and the woman wanted to stop him. Mark stepped out of his patrol car, straightening his uniform. He knew that crowds could turn restless if they thought the police weren't in control, so he moved quickly. As he walked toward the pair, the man slipped around a corner and disappeared from sight. The woman was still talking into a small phone, her eyes following the man as if she didn't even notice Mark approaching. He called out, "Ma'am, I need you to stop for a moment." His voice was firm, the way officers were trained to speak when they needed compliance. The woman kept walking. She wasn't running or acting aggressive, but she wasn't stopping either. Her phone was still at her ear, and she was speaking quickly into it, glancing now and then in the direction the man had gone. Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't like being ignored, especially when he was trying to get information about a situation. He took a few longer strides and moved to block her path. "Ma'am, I said stop." This time she looked at him, but only for a brief second, before glancing back at the phone. It felt to him like she was brushing him off, and that stirred a flicker of frustration in his chest. In his experience, people who refused to stop often had something to hide. Maybe she was part of whatever trouble had started the disturbance. Around them, a few people in the crowd were already holding up their phones, recording the scene. Mark noticed, but ignored it. He was used to being filmed while on duty. It came with the job. Still, it made him feel the weight of every movement he made. The woman tried to step around him, but he shifted to block her again. "I need to speak with you about what happened here," he said. "You can't just walk away." Her expression didn't change much, but there was a hint of urgency in her eyes. She lowered the phone for a second and said, "I can't stop right now, it's important." Then she lifted the phone back to her ear and started speaking again. Mark didn't catch all the words, but it sounded like she was giving directions to someone, or maybe describing where someone was going. That only made him more suspicious. Who was she talking to? Was she warning someone? Was she planning to meet the man who had left? Mark's thoughts raced. He had been trained to control situations quickly before they escalated. Letting someone walk away could mean losing a key witness or allowing a suspect to escape. The crowd was watching, and he didn't want them thinking the police had no authority here. He stepped closer, holding out a hand as if to physically stop her forward motion. "Ma'am, you need to end the call and talk to me now." She glanced at him again, this time with a little more annoyance in her eyes, but she didn't speak. She sidestepped him, and that tiny move felt to Mark like open defiance. He reached out, placing a hand on her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to signal she wasn't free to go. "You need to cooperate," he said, his voice lower now, trying to keep the exchange controlled. The crowd murmured, a mix of curiosity and tension. Someone shouted something about leaving her alone, but another person called out that the police were just doing their job. Mark ignored the voices. His focus was on the woman. She pulled her arm back slightly, still holding the phone in her other hand. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "I'm in the middle of something important." Before she could finish, Mark noticed her looking over his shoulder toward the next block. For a split second, he thought she was about to bolt. His pulse picked up. He didn't want to chase her through the crowd. That could get messy fast. The woman took a step back, clearly trying to keep her eyes on whatever was happening down the street. Mark moved forward instinctively to close the gap between them. The situation was getting under his skin. He wanted answers now, not later. Her phone conversation was rapid, almost urgent. Mark caught words like, "He's heading east, and don't lose him." That struck him as strange. Who was she talking to? And why was she giving directions? He considered that maybe she was involved in following someone, but that didn't make sense for an average civilian. The thought that she might be working with someone who was part of the disturbance crossed his mind again. He was no stranger to tense street situations. In his years on the force, he had dealt with countless cases where hesitation led to losing a suspect. That thought pressed on him like a weight. He couldn't let her just leave. He had no idea that at that very moment, he was standing in the middle of something much bigger than he realized, and that every choice he made from here on would carry consequences he couldn't yet imagine. Mark's heart was beating faster now. The woman was still on the phone, her voice quick and firm, like she was giving urgent instructions to someone on the other end. Her eyes kept darting past him, scanning the street as if she was tracking something or someone. To Mark, this looked suspicious. People didn't usually act this way after a public argument unless they were involved in something shady. He tried again to get her attention. "Put the phone down and talk to me. This is important." His tone was calm but firm, the way he'd been trained to speak when trying to control a tense situation. But she didn't obey. Instead, she took another step to the side, trying to move around him. Her hand holding the phone never lowered, and her gaze kept shifting toward the corner where the man had disappeared earlier. Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hated situations where someone refused to cooperate. In his years as a police officer, he had learned that hesitation could cost you, sometimes letting a suspect escape, sometimes letting a dangerous situation spiral. The fact that she was ignoring him in front of a growing crowd only made the pressure worse. People were filming on their phones, and he knew whatever happened here could be online in minutes. The woman muttered something into the phone. "He's still moving. 2 blocks away." And that was enough to make Mark's suspicion flare. Who was she talking about? Was she helping the man who had walked away? Was she coordinating something with him? He didn't know, and that uncertainty made him more determined to stop her. He stepped directly in her path again. "Ma'am, stop right now." This time, there was a little more steel in his voice. The crowd seemed to sense the tension rising. Some people edged closer, wanting a better view, while others stood back, whispering to each other about what was happening. The woman lowered her phone for the briefest moment. "I told you," she said, her voice clipped. "I can't stop right now. This is urgent." Mark felt frustration building. In situations like this, the first priority was to get control. He reached out again, placing his hand firmly on her arm to prevent her from moving past him. She didn't pull away hard, but she looked at him with sharp, impatient eyes, as if he was the one interrupting something important. The sound of footsteps running nearby caught Mark's attention for a second, but when he glanced toward the noise, he saw nothing but a couple of teenagers jogging past. When he turned back to the woman, she had shifted again, angling her body like she might try to slip around him. Mark's instincts kicked in. If she got away, he would lose his chance to understand what was going on. He stepped forward to close the distance, his hand still lightly on her arm. "You need to end that call now," he said. The woman glanced down the street again. "You don't understand," she repeated, this time more firmly. "If I stop, we could lose him." Lose who? The question ran through Mark's mind like a flash. She wasn't talking about him or herself. She was talking about the man who had left earlier. But why was she so focused on him? Was she trying to follow him? Help him escape? The uncertainty only made the situation more tense. The crowd around them was silent for a moment, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic and the faint chatter of people on the opposite side of the street. Mark could feel the weight of every eye on him. In his training, he had been told that public perception mattered. If people saw an officer letting someone walk away during a tense situation, it could look like weakness. The woman moved again, quick and precise, as if she was going to step past him on his right side. Mark moved with her, blocking the way once more. "That's enough," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You need to stop." Her phone was still pressed to her ear. Mark caught another snippet of her conversation. "No, I'm fine. Just keep following him." Her words made his suspicion spike even more. Whoever was on the other end of that call was involved in the same situation, and Mark had no idea who they were. Mark's thoughts were racing now. He considered calling for backup, but the woman was right here in front of him, and the man she seemed to be tracking was already gone. If he spent time on the radio, she might vanish too. The woman glanced over her shoulder toward the same direction as before. Her whole body seemed tense, her attention pulled toward something far away. It was almost as if she wasn't fully aware of Mark anymore, like she was more focused on what was happening down the street than the fact that a uniformed police officer was trying to stop her. That feeling, being ignored, being dismissed, pushed at Mark's patience. He didn't like being sidelined in his own job. He didn't like the idea of losing control in front of a crowd. He didn't like the mystery of her conversation. All those things swirled together in his head, making the moment feel sharper, heavier. He took a step closer. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order. Stop walking, end the call, and talk to me." For the first time, she looked directly into his eyes and held his gaze. "You're making a mistake," she said flatly. The words hit him strangely. They weren't defiant in the usual sense. They almost sounded like a warning. But in the heat of the moment, he didn't read it that way. All he saw was a person refusing to listen in front of a crowd, while possibly helping someone who had just been in a public disturbance. The phones in the crowd were still up, recording. Mark could feel them, even without looking. His jaw was tight, his pulse loud in his ears. Every second that passed made it harder for him to step back. His training told him to de-escalate, but his instincts told him that letting her go might mean losing control completely. The woman tried to take another step, but Mark moved with her again. The small movement of blocking her path was enough to make the crowd shift uncomfortably. Someone muttered something about, "Let her go," but another voice responded with, "She's not listening." In that moment, Mark didn't realize how close he was to crossing a line that would change everything. He was focused on the woman's refusal, on the possibility that she was connected to something dangerous, and on the pressure of dozens of eyes watching him decide what to do next. She was still talking into the phone, her voice calm but urgent, giving instructions he couldn't quite understand. Each word made him more certain that she was involved in something she wasn't telling him about. And then, almost without thinking, Mark felt himself leaning forward, ready to take the next step to get her attention. He had no idea that the truth about who she was and what she was doing there would hit him harder than anything he'd ever faced in his career. Mark's patience had worn thin. The woman's phone call, her refusal to stop, her constant glances toward the street, everything about the situation was building like a storm in his head. His focus had narrowed until all he could see was her defiance and his need to regain control. The noise of the crowd felt distant now, like a low hum in the background. All that mattered to him in that moment was stopping her. He stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "That's it," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're done here. You need to talk to me now." The woman didn't back away, but she didn't stop either. She tried to sidestep again, still holding the phone to her ear. "Stay on him," she said into the receiver. "Don't let him out of sight." Her tone was calm but urgent, like someone giving instructions in the middle of a chess game where every move mattered. Mark's frustration boiled over. He reached out, his hand brushing her arm again, but she stepped back sharply, her eyes flashing. The crowd murmured louder, sensing the moment was about to tip. Someone shouted, "Hey, just let her go!" But another voice snapped back, "She's not listening to him." The noise pressed in from all sides, but Mark didn't want to show hesitation. His training told him that in a tense public situation, you had to project confidence, even if you were unsure. People took cues from your body language. If you looked uncertain, they'd lose trust in your ability to manage the scene. The woman's attention wasn't on him at all. Her gaze kept sweeping past him, down the street, as if the only thing that mattered was the man who had vanished earlier. Mark didn't know it yet, but that man was the key to everything that was happening. Her lips moved quickly as she spoke into the phone again. "He's picking up speed. You'll have to cut him off at the next block." Something about the word "cut off" made Mark tense. It sounded like she was coordinating with someone to intercept a person, maybe for the wrong reasons. He imagined a dozen possible scenarios, none of them good. Was she helping the man escape from something? Was this a setup for trouble further down the road? In a split second, Mark made a choice he would soon regret. He moved in front of her, again this time raising his voice just enough for the crowd to hear. "Ma'am, I am giving you a direct order. End that call right now." She stopped moving, finally meeting his eyes. For the first time, he saw something new in her expression. Not fear, not defiance exactly, but a sharp, almost warning look. "You're making a serious mistake," she said quietly. Her tone caught him off guard. It wasn't the tone of someone caught doing something wrong. It was the tone of someone who knew more than he did. But the pressure of the moment left little room for him to think it through. He felt the crowd's attention like heat on the back of his neck. Every second of delay felt like losing control. In the heat of the moment, Mark reached out again, trying to get her attention physically. The contact was brief, but the reaction from the crowd was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of more phones being lifted to record. He didn't know it, but several of those cameras were catching every detail of his face, her face, and what happened next. The woman stumbled slightly, then straightened, her phone dropping to her side. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to go quiet. The crowd's voices faded, the background noise of traffic dulled. She reached into her jacket slowly, her movements deliberate. Mark's first thought was that she might be going for something dangerous, and his muscles tensed. But instead, her hand emerged holding a leather badge wallet. She flipped it open, and the gold emblem inside caught the sunlight. It took Mark a second to register what he was looking at. The circular seal, the bold letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But then she spoke, her voice steady, carrying the weight of authority that needed no introduction. "Special Agent Claire Donovan, FBI." The words hit him like a physical blow. The crowd seemed to freeze. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh no," and another voice muttered, "She's FBI?" Mark's stomach dropped. Every assumption he had made in the last 10 minutes flipped upside down. She wasn't helping a suspect escape. She was tracking one. She wasn't refusing to stop because she was guilty. She was refusing because she was in the middle of an active operation. He took a step back without realizing it. His mouth went dry. You, you're an agent? He asked, his voice lower, now almost hesitant. Yes, she said simply. And the man you just let walk away is the suspect I've been tracking for weeks. He's dangerous. And now he has a head start because you stopped me. The words were sharp, but not shouted. They cut through the tension like a blade. Mark felt his chest tighten. His mind raced through the past few minutes, replaying every choice, every word, every time he blocked her path. The crowd was whispering now, their attention shifting between the two of them. Some people looked confused. Others looked like they were starting to piece together what had just happened. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. The realization of what he'd done was settling in like cold water soaking into his uniform. He had interfered with a federal agent on duty. He had wasted crucial time in the middle of her pursuit, and he had done it all in front of a crowd with cameras running. Claire didn't linger. She raised her phone again, speaking quickly into it. Suspect is heading east. We've lost visual contact. Check the cross streets. Her tone was clipped, professional, all business. She turned slightly as if to go after him again, but the suspect was already too far ahead. Mark stepped back fully now, giving her space, his mind still trying to catch up. The badge, her calm authority, the fact that she had warned him, it all crashed together in his thoughts. He had been so sure he was in control of the situation, and now he realized he had been completely wrong. The sound of sirens approached from a distance, probably other units responding to the disturbance call. Mark stood frozen, his heart sinking, as he imagined the conversations that were about to happen. With his supervisor, with her team, maybe even with federal authorities. Claire glanced at him one last time, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and began walking quickly toward a black SUV that had just pulled up at the end of the block. Two other people stepped out, also wearing plain clothes, moving with purpose. They were clearly part of her team. Mark stayed rooted, in place, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but he knew the videos would not disappear. They would be online, replayed, shared, and judged by people who didn't know the full story, but who would see enough to make up their minds. And deep down, Mark knew that no matter how he explained it, nothing could change the fact that he had stopped an FBI agent in the middle of her work. Mark barely remembered the moments after Claire Donovan walked away. His body moved on autopilot, guiding him back toward his patrol car, but his mind was stuck replaying the last few minutes like a broken video loop. The image of the gold FBI badge was burned into his thoughts, along with her words. You're making a serious mistake. The distant wail of sirens grew louder. Two more patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing red and blue across the buildings. Officers stepped out, looking from the dispersing crowd to Mark with questioning eyes. He could feel them silently asking what had happened, but he didn't answer right away. He was still trying to process it himself. Claire was already gone. Her black SUV turning down a side street with her team inside. The suspect she had been tracking was nowhere to be seen. Mark knew he had been the reason she lost those precious minutes, the kind of minutes that could make or break an operation. The crowd slowly thinned out, but a few people lingered. Some were still talking in low voices, others were staring at their phone screens, replaying videos they had just recorded. Mark didn't have to see them to know those videos would spread far beyond this street. It was only a matter of time before they reached his department. When Mark finally got back into his patrol car, he felt a tightness in his chest. He switched off his siren and began driving back to the station. The streets passed in a blur. He thought about explaining what had happened, how he hadn't known she was an agent, how she hadn't identified herself until the very end. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter much. People would see the video, not the full story, and the time he reached the station, his watch showed he had only been on shift for less than 2 hours. It already felt like the longest day of his career. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, but the moment he walked through the doors, he saw Captain Reynolds standing near the front desk, talking to another officer. Reynolds was a tall, stern man, with silver hair and a voice that carried across a room without him needing to shout. The moment his eyes landed on Mark, his conversation stopped. "Henderson," he said, his tone flat. "My office, now." Mark followed without a word. The captain closed the door behind them, shutting out the sounds of the station. He moved around to his desk, sat down, and gestured for Mark to sit in the chair across from him. The silence stretched for a moment before Reynolds spoke again. "I just got off the phone with someone from the FBI," he said, his eyes locked on Mark. "They're not happy." Mark swallowed. "Sir, I didn't know she was—" Reynolds held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not interested in excuses right now. Special Agent Claire Donovan was in the middle of an active operation. You got in her way. You delayed her. The suspect she was tracking is gone." The words hit like stones. Mark wanted to explain that she hadn't identified herself until it was too late, but he knew the video wouldn't show the whole context. It would just show him blocking her path, touching her arm, ignoring her urgency. "And Henderson," Reynolds continued, leaning forward slightly. "There's video." Mark felt his stomach drop further. "It's online already?" "Not yet," Reynolds said. "But it will be. Someone in the crowd was recording. It's only a matter of time before it spreads." "You know what that means?" Mark did know. In the age of social media, a few seconds of video could destroy reputations. People wouldn't wait for an investigation. They would make up their minds the moment they saw the clip. Reynolds sat back, rubbing his temple. "The FBI has filed a formal complaint. They're requesting a full review of your actions. Until this is resolved, you're suspended with pay." The word suspended felt heavy in the air. Mark had never been suspended before. 10 years on the job, and now he was being sent home in the middle of a shift. "I understand," Mark said quietly. Reynolds studied him for a moment, then added, "I've known you a long time, Henderson. You've done good work. But this is serious. Go home. Don't talk to the press. Don't post anything online. We'll contact you when we need a statement." Mark nodded and stood. As he walked out of the office, he could feel the eyes of other officers on him. They didn't know the full story yet, but word traveled fast in the station. By the time he reached the parking lot, he was sure half the department had already heard some version of what had happened. The drive home felt longer than the one to the station. He kept replaying Claire's expression in his mind. Not just the moment she showed him the badge, but the way she had looked at him before that, as if she was trying to warn him without saying too much. He realized now that she had been balancing two impossible tasks: keeping her cover in an active operation and dealing with a uniformed officer who didn't know the bigger picture. When he finally pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a fellow officer. "It's on Twitter." Mark didn't even want to look, but curiosity won. He opened the link and saw the shaky phone video of the moment he blocked Claire's path. The caption read, "Cop stops woman during argument." Then learns she's FBI. The video had only been up for an hour, but it already had hundreds of shares. Comments were pouring in, some defending him, most criticizing him. People argued over who was right, with many saying he should have listened to her from the start. Mark set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The weight of what had happened was finally settling in. His career wasn't over yet, but it was on the edge. And the worst part was knowing that he had interfered with something much bigger than himself, something that might have consequences far beyond his suspension. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Claire was sitting in the back of the black SUV, speaking to her team. The suspect was still at large, and every minute that passed made finding him harder. She didn't mention Mark by name, but she did say the delay had cost them valuable ground. For Mark, the waiting game had begun. The phone calls, the interviews, the official review, they were all ahead of him. But in that quiet moment in his living room, all he could think about was the image of the badge in her hand and the way everything had changed in a single, unthinking moment. Mark's suspension stretched into days that felt like weeks. Each morning, he would wake up with the same heavy feeling in his chest, wondering if this was the day the department would call with their decision. The video of the incident had exploded online. It was on news sites, discussed on radio shows, and debated endlessly on social media. Some people said he had been doing his job. Others accused him of acting without listening or thinking. He avoided going out unless he had to. At the grocery store, he noticed a few people whispering when they recognized him. A man in the parking lot gave him a slow shake of the head as if disappointed. Mark wasn't used to being the center of public attention, and certainly not like this. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after the incident, he got the call. Captain Reynolds told him to report to the station for a meeting. His stomach tightened. This would be the moment he found out if his career was still intact. When he arrived, Reynolds was waiting with a serious expression. "Henderson," he said, "we're going to the federal building. The FBI wants to speak with you directly." Mark was caught off guard. "The FBI?" "Yes," Reynolds said. "They want to close this matter officially. Let's go." The drive to the federal building was quiet. Mark kept thinking about what he would say. He wanted to apologize, but he also didn't want to sound like he was making excuses. He didn't know if Claire Donovan would be there, but a part of him hoped she would, so he could tell her face to face that he was sorry. Inside the building, security was tight. They were escorted up to a large conference room with a long table. At the far end sat Claire Donovan. She was dressed in a dark suit, her hair pulled back neatly, looking every bit the professional federal agent. Mark took a deep breath as he walked in. Claire stood and gave a polite nod. "Officer Henderson," she said evenly. "Agent Donovan," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. They all sat down. An older man in a gray suit introduced himself as the FBI's regional supervisor. He explained that the suspect Claire had been tracking had slipped away entirely after the incident. However, they had picked up his trail again a few days later, in another city. "We got him," the supervisor said, "but it took more time than it should have." Mark listened, feeling the weight of those words. He knew what more time than it should have really meant. Claire spoke next. "Officer Henderson, I want you to understand something," she said. "I was undercover that day. I couldn't identify myself until it was safe. When you stopped me, I was in the middle of coordinating with my team to intercept a dangerous suspect. You couldn't have known that, but your actions delayed us." Mark nodded. "I understand. And I'm sorry. I should have read the situation better. I was focused on control and procedure, but I wasn't listening. I was wrong." There was a pause. Claire studied him for a moment before saying, "I appreciate that you're willing to admit it. We all make mistakes in the field. What matters is whether we learn from them." The supervisor leaned forward. "The FBI will not pursue further action against you. However, we expect your department to address the matter internally. This should be a learning opportunity for everyone involved." Reynolds nodded, and Mark felt a wave of relief. He wasn't losing his job, at least not today. As the meeting wrapped up, Claire stood. "One more thing," she said, looking directly at Mark. "We're running a joint training session next week between local police and federal agents. I'd like you to be there." Mark blinked. "You want me to be part of it?" "Yes," she said. "If we're going to work together in the future, we need to understand each other's roles and limitations. And I think your experience could help make that point clear." A week later, Mark found himself in a large training room at the FBI's local field office. Officers and agents sat together, listening as Claire spoke about communication in high-pressure situations. She didn't single him out, but she used a scenario that sounded suspiciously familiar, an undercover agent in the middle of an operation being confronted by a well-meaning but uninformed officer. She talked about reading body language, asking the right questions, and understanding that sometimes the person in front of you may be playing a role for a reason. Mark listened carefully, realizing just how many subtle clues he had missed that day. When the session ended, Claire walked over. "You handled today well," she said. Mark smiled faintly. "I think I handled it better than last time." Allowed herself a small smile. That's the point. Over the following months, the incident slowly faded from the headlines. New stories took its place, and the online arguments died down. Mark returned to full duty, carrying with him a sharper awareness of how little he might know in any given situation. He never forgot the moment Claire showed him her badge, or the look in her eyes when she told him he was making a mistake. Those words stayed with him, not as an insult, but as a reminder. In the heat of the moment, certainty could be dangerous. The job still brought surprises every day. There were still tense calls, unpredictable crowds, and fast-moving situations. But Mark approached them differently now. He asked more questions. He paid closer attention to small details. He thought twice before acting once, and sometimes late. At night, he would think about that morning on the corner of Oak Avenue and 7th Street. He would picture the crowd, the tension, and the way the entire day had turned on a single moment. In the end, he knew he was lucky. He had been given a second chance, not just to keep his badge, but to become a better officer, and he intended to make the most of it.